Good morning. Oh, you gotta love a good mystery. But where are you going to find one for £2.99? Sorry, that was a cheap plug and a cheap pun. The Mystery of Bleak House is one of my more forgettable novels written in 2014 and is a kind of combination between Agatha Christie and Back to the Future. Yet, listening to the AI voices describe it really ought not to be forgotten, and it deserves a rewrite. So I shall add that to the list. For grammar purposes only, you understand. Anywho, this story explores the dark history of Bleak House, a residence defined by generational trauma and a mysterious laboratory in its attic. Mary Park, the central figure, somebody loves me, navigates a life marred by a cold upbringing, a failed marriage to Christopher, and the eventual discovery of her father's hidden experiments. Her father, Sir Horace, worked with an unsettling mathematician named Gregory Mainwaring on a purported time machine, a device that supposedly caused Horace's disappearance and haunted the home's attic. The narrative weaves through different eras, revealing how the house's sinister atmosphere impacted family members and servants alike across the 19th and 20th centuries. However, ultimately the story concludes with Mary reflecting on the tragic loss of her daughter and the realization that the house's legacy was built on nothing less than deception and ancestral suffering. But, would you, the reader, believe her? Can you guess the ending? You'll have to keep your wits around you. Wink, wink. I think it would make a good play for the BBC. Can you hear me, BBC? I do like this novel. As I said, I wrote it in 14. It's another year gone. And yes, it's complicated. So certain people who can't remember names, and I won't name them, but they know who you are, you will find it complicated. But it is, again, I mentioned time machines and scientific things like that, but everything is not as you seem, not as it seems. The Mystery of Bleak House. It's a mystery, but it isn't really a mystery. There you go. Enjoy.
We have a deep dive today that, well, it pulls us not just into a set of documents, but into this century-long vortex of secrets, of inherited trauma, and a truly astonishing piece of scientific folly.
It really is. This is a story about how the social injustices of the 19th century just festered, and then they ripened into this catastrophic personal ruin in the 1970s.
A dark legacy.
Yeah.
And it all seems to hinge on class conflict, a really mysterious disappearance, and this unsettling idea that, I don't know, psychological trauma can almost permeate the very fabric of a house.
Exactly. And our sources for this are so personal. We're looking at journals, private letters, even police reports. They detail this massive family saga that focuses on one woman, Mary Husher Peepal, and this infamous Bloomsbury residence she inherits, which is called, fittingly, Bleak House.
And our mission for you, the learner, is to trace this legacy with us. We're going to start in the dead of winter, 1975, and then peel back all these layers, all the way to a really shocking incident in 1871.
So let's set the scene. We're in London, December 1975, and the city is just engulfed by a truly massive snowstorm.
Right, the kind of storm people were comparing to that notoriously crippling winter of 1963.
Absolutely. The snow is so deep it creates this world of profound stillness. One of the sources describes it beautifully, actually, as a muffled blue world. Everything is just quiet because the sound is completely absorbed by these deep drifts.
And that atmosphere, that quiet, it immediately highlights Mary's internal state, doesn't it? She's 35, and you can tell from her manner of speaking, it's very refined, very educated, that she comes from a previously aristocratic background, the Husher peoples.
Oh, yes. But her current reality is one of acute financial strain. It's a total contrast.
We see her anticipating the difficulty of just getting out of her home in Wanstead, making that long slog through the snow to Snaresbrook Station. It sounds miserable.
It does, but there's this strangely revealing silver lining to the blizzard for her.
And that silver lining is a direct indicator of just how desperate she is, financially. The severity of the snow guarantees that after her office Christmas party, she'll be able to justify taking a very expensive taxi ride home.
A fare she just couldn't afford otherwise.
Exactly. That one small detail, needing a blizzard to justify a necessary trip home, it tells you everything you need to know about the tightrope she's walking.
And right outside her door, we get this striking contrast. While Mary is inside, mentally balancing her budget and her commute, we see Harry the milkman.
Oh, he's thoroughly miserable. He's pushing his little trolley through knee-deep drifts in East London. He's navigating the harsh physical reality of the working class in that brutal cold.
And Mary, showing that kind of ingrained, inherited courtesy, she offers him a cup of tea.
Which he declines. And it's not out of rudeness, is it? It's out of this practical fear that his van will get completely snowed in on the main road.
It establishes the economic stratification immediately. Mary is worried about her peace of mind, her divorce. Harry is worried about physical entrapment and, well, his livelihood.
But the source really emphasizes that Mary's exhaustion isn't physical. It's this deep spiritual fatigue, a weariness that comes from a profound lack of peace of mind.
And that lack of peace, it stems from two primary, just suffocating problems. First, her dwindling financial stability, even though she's sitting on millions in inherited assets. And second, the total collapse of her 14-year marriage to Christopher Park.
She is standing at a terrible crossroads. Her mother, Mercy, has just passed away in August of '75. So Mary inherits the Bloomsbury house, Bleak House, valued at millions, but these legal entanglements mean she can't actually touch the cash.
It's an impossible situation. And this impending crisis is forcing her to move back to the very place where her childhood was defined by terrifying psychological trauma. This return, it really sets the stage for a century-old reckoning.
Okay, so let's jump straight into that immediate crisis, the breakdown of Mary and Christopher Park's marriage. This is all happening between 1975 and early '76. And it's a union that was fiercely opposed by her family from day one.
Oh, absolutely. The Husher peoples, they viewed Christopher as socially beneath them. The sources record these cruel descriptions they had for him. He was an out-of-work mechanic, a mangy man. They simply could not fathom why their refined daughter would associate with him.
And their meeting was just, a simple chance encounter while she was at college near Paddington.
That's it. It was never enough to bridge that massive class chasm in her family's eyes. And so, after 14 years, the marriage has completely dissolved, and it's all catalyzed by what Mary calls that revolting incident at the previous year's Christmas party.
She walked into the company bathroom
And found Christopher engaged in a, let's say, highly intimate encounter with a junior female partner.
a deeply humiliating and, public betrayal. Mary had spent more than a decade defending him against her mother's really caustic disapproval.
But now her high-minded, if infirm, mother, Mercy, was tragically vindicated. She was just full of these self-righteous recriminations from her sickbed. The family chasm had finally just swallowed the marriage whole.
And the aftermath was cold. It was brutal. Christopher just disappears for a month without a word, no apology, and retreats to his brother's house in Cancel.
Mary reflects on this so bitterly. She knows he has this innate technical skill. He'd had several opportunities to set up his own successful garage.
But he was just perpetually an idler, a man who consistently failed to realize his potential.
And Mary summarizes the depth of her disgust, I think, very powerfully. She sees his infidelity as the ultimate act of self-sabotage. He threw away their entire life for what? A casual, low-class encounter in a place as vulgar as a company toilet.
But Christopher, in his desperation, he doesn't take full responsibility, does he?
No, not at all. He tries to turn the blame back on her. He admits he was wrong, but he uses Mary's own history against her. He claims he was driven away by what he calls Mary's slight neurotic nature.
And he calls them faint echoes of a distant time, a direct reference to the psychological horrors she endured in her childhood home.
It's an incredibly cruel and manipulative defense. He claims the staleness of their intimate life, Mary's persistent unease, that's what drove him to seek comfort elsewhere.
Which brings us right back to the night of the 1975 snowstorm.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, fueled by alcohol from the party and just this residual fury, finds Christopher waiting for her outside her Wanstead home. It's nearly 2 a.m.
And the scene just underscores his utter destitution. He looks wretched. Pale, thin, ill-equipped for the weather. He's wearing just a donkey jacket and plimsolls in this deep snow.
He's completely broke, permanently unemployed, and he's desperately trying to reconcile. He hasn't even been able to afford a Christmas present for their daughter, Carol.
Mary, however, is resolute. She absolutely refuses reconciliation. She sees this attempt not as a desire for genuine connection, but as a calculated move to secure a financial claim on the impending Bloomsbury inheritance.
She calls him a scrounger. She tells him that he only wants half of the house so he would never have to work again.
And her demand is absolute. She says, you sort out your life, you make something of yourself, you do something that makes me feel proud of you. Perhaps then I'll listen.
He just retreats into the snow, this figure of profound misery. He only manages to mutter a request for Mary to tell Carol that he loves her before she just violently slams the door.
And that encounter, really, it cements the end of their marriage and Mary's decision to move forward completely alone.
The financial pressure she's under is immediate, and it's overwhelming. Her mother, Mercy, died in August 1975, which makes Mary the sole heir to Bleak House, a property valued in the millions. But there's a huge legal barrier.
Right. Her father, Horace, had only been declared legally dead in the autumn of 1974. The estate was tied up in these incredibly complicated trusts involving jurisdictions like Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg.
So she was asset-rich but cash-poor. I mean, the sources say she was barely able to pay Carol's school dinner money despite sitting on a potential fortune.
And her doctor, recognizing this absurd financial tightrope walk, suggests a radical, if temporary, solution.
Rent out the Wanstead house for income and move into the massive yet legally complicated Bloomsbury residence. The income from the rent, combined with her wages, would stabilize her until the estate was finally settled.
But Mary sees this move as not just a financial necessity, but also a moral one. And this is driven by what we could call the Carol's disruption subplot.
Right. Carol, who's 16 now, is deeply angry about all the fighting and the impending move.
And Mary discovers a piece of foil in Carol's jeans. It contains dope marijuana.
Mary's fury is this mixture of moral outrage and, well, aristocratic disappointment. She says, I did not bring you up to do this.
And Carol's retort just highlights that generational disconnect, doesn't it? Mom, do you know how much that cost?
Mary views Carol's new friend, Mandy, with intense suspicion. She's described as unkempt from Camden and seemingly involved in debt and all sorts of questionable activities.
So Mary decides that the move to Bloomsbury, which she privately calls the museum, is necessary to break Carol away from these drugged-up friends. The upheaval, as traumatic as it is for Mary, feels essential for her daughter's future.
But this massive empty house in Bloomsbury still represents a significant financial drain. So Mary decides to rent out a room to a tenant to further stabilize her income. She uses an agency, Rupert's, and she quickly meets a man named George Mainwaring.
And this is a critical juncture. This is where Mary's desperation completely overrides all of her instincts. We really need to pause and look at the source's description of George because it is meticulous and it's profoundly repulsive.
He's described as short, unattractive, plain-featured, with these oily black eyes and a really disturbing lack of eyebrows.
The combination makes him look, according to the source, like Hitler, but older.
His mannerisms are just as disturbing. A nasal voice, unwholesome breath, and this noticeable tendency to spit when he talks.
And we have to mention the strong, sickly body odor he emanates. It's so intense that Liz, the returning maid, immediately wrinkles her nose and writes air freshener at the top of her next shopping list.
So, given Mary's refined, aristocratic background, the fact that she doesn't immediately dismiss him is shocking.
And that's the question we have to ask. Why? Why would Mary ignore all of these internal alarms?
Because George offers the one thing money cannot buy: knowledge of her disappeared father, Horace.
George claims to have worked for Horace for 11 years, starting in January 1960, which was right after Mary married Christopher. Horace's disappearance in 1971 remains this open wound, and Mary is desperate for answers.
Especially about the locked, forbidden top room, the lab, which she is still terrified to enter because of the lifetime of conditioning and fear.
Mary sees George as the key. He's the guide who can unlock the secrets of the house and of her father. Despite her training as a financial consultant, she just throws caution to the wind. She ignores the real estate agent's advice and allows George to move in immediately.
And George secures the position by telling her, "I'm the only person who can work it," implicitly referring to Horace's enigmatic experiments. Mary's need for closure just completely outweighs her concern for safety, or even for smell.
Okay, so to understand why Mary is so desperate, why she fears that top room so intensely, we have to delve back over a century now and trace the emotional lineage of this house. Bleak House was bought by Louis Husher people, that's Horace's grandfather, in the 1870s, and its legacy is defined by institutional cruelty and this profound emotional distance.
Let's start with Louis's wife, Wilhelmina. The sources say she was a strong personality. She was the one who insisted on the hyphenated Husher people name.
She was, but she descended into severe paranoia and delusions. She was convinced that people were coming out of the walls to attack her.
And her treatment, it just reflects the horrific medical practices and societal controls of the Victorian era. She was hospitalized in 1874. Part of her diagnosis was nymphomania,
A term that was often used to justify social control, particularly over women who exhibited any form of independence or refused to conform.
and the treatment prescribed was a clitoridectomy. We have to contextualize this for you, the listener. This was a brutal, non-consensual surgery carried out not for any physical ailment, but as a severe form of social correction.
A procedure that was tragically applied to women who showed too much spirit or, in some documented cases, simply wanted to leave home to become nurses. It's just horrifying.
Wilhelmina died in 1876. The operation had completely failed to cure her delirium.
And this history, this deep, dark family secret, convinced Mary's mother, Mercy, that the house itself was cursed.
Right. Mercy believed the house possessed an insidious and demoniac presence that caused problems for every single generation. She thought it permeated the walls and ceilings, acting as the true genesis of the family's pervasive misery.
But the core of the house's destructive power, the actual source of this demoniac presence, it isn't supernatural at all. It's the sheer brutality of class exploitation. And it's all embodied in the fate of a 15-year-old girl named Hortense Ward in 1871.
Hortense was the scullery maid, the absolute bottom of the staff hierarchy. She was utterly isolated, ridiculed for her slight French accent, and subjected to routine physical violence.
The sources mention one particularly chilling instance where the housekeeper, a Mrs. Pierce, beat her so severely that she bore a bloody welt across her forehead for days.
And crucially, where did this poor girl sleep? She was relegated to a cold, lofty room on the top floor. The precise room that would later become Horace's laboratory, the forbidden room Mary fears so intensely.
And Hortense suffered intense psychological trauma in that room. She was constantly plagued by sounds of whispering and odd and unexplained flashes of light.
And given that her French-born mother had died in an asylum, Hortense lived in this constant paralyzing fear that she too was descending into madness and would be institutionalized just like her mother.
And here's the brutal secret that ties this entire story together. Louis Husher Papal, Mary's great-grandfather, the same man whose wife was being institutionalized for paranoia,
He was the person who impregnated Hortense.
and then ruthlessly threw her into the street, a fate that was often equivalent to a death sentence in Victorian London.
The child Hortense bore was a girl named Peggy, who, of course, grew up and eventually became George Mainwaring's mother.
This one act of aristocratic savagery and the subsequent cover-up is the original sin of Bleak House. It creates this direct, multi-generational line of vengeance that George is now pursuing in 1976.
And the traumatic energy of that room, it clearly impacted Mary decades later. Her own childhood bedroom was directly opposite the lab.
She experienced what she described as childhood hell. It was marked by terrifying nightmares, screaming fits, an overwhelming feeling of being observed.
And that distinctive, alarming smell of burnt rubber that often saturated the air in that corridor.
Mary's condition was so severe that Mercy feared she would be permanently neurotic and unmarriageable. The family resisted extreme treatments like electroconvulsive therapy, but Mary seemed destined for this withdrawn, institutional life, living under the pervasive shadow of the house's emotional history.
But then, around the age of 16, something completely inexplicable happened. Mary experienced a mysterious, delirious episode.
She was hallucinating vividly, seeing stars, watching colorful snakes writhe on the walls, and even hallucinating her own mother as an ugly monster. Her pupils were massively enlarged, which indicates a profound physiological event.
The local doctor just assumed she'd ingested something hallucinogenic.
But what's astonishing is the aftermath. After this intense hallucinatory episode, her mental health stabilized almost instantly. The nightmare ceased, the paranoia lifted, and she became this bright, spirited, vivacious young woman.
The woman Christopher fell in love with and married.
This source really hints strongly that this incident, perhaps caused by some external chemical or physical interference, somehow broke the connection between Mary and the house's oppressive energy. If we connect this back to Hortense, we have to consider that the suffering contained in that top room was finding ways to manifest, creating generations of mental distress.
Okay, so let's shift now to the source of that burnt rubber smell and the focus of the top room. Horace Husher People, Mary's father, and his deeply flawed yet spectacular scientific endeavor, the Time Viewer.
Horace was the perfect example of the gentleman scientist. He had no formal higher qualifications, but his inherited wealth and his title, he was knighted in 1941, provided him with the resources, the equipment, and the isolation needed to conduct research that would have been impossible for anyone else.
And his work built on his own father's pre-war research. But Horace refined it significantly, starting around 1939. His initial focus was purely industrial.
Right, he was experimenting with ultra-high sound frequencies. He was attempting to melt metals using minimal energy input.
The key here is the sound frequencies. We're not talking about simple audio waves. These were beyond human hearing and highly energetic. But instead of efficient metallurgy, he stumbled upon this completely unexpected effect, which he called the Time Viewer.
He quickly realized he hadn't created a machine that could transport him through time, but rather a device that could access historical moments. Horace had this theory that the past is still there, not vanished. It acts as a kind of massive, stored energy memory that the right frequencies could tap into.
In its earliest form, just a thick hoop of gold, he managed to view the outside of his house back in 1939. He saw barren trees and a woman in clothes his grandmother would have worn. The proof was circumstantial, but it was enough to fuel his immense, self-funded ambition.
And the components of the machine quickly became, well, impossible. The sources detail its progression. It required 2 tall boxes and this special crystallized material. The core component was diamonds impregnated with 80% gold.
And this is where the science really enters the realm of utter folly, as George Mainwaring later confirms. Horace claimed he had found a revolutionary way to liquefy diamond in order to achieve this impregnation.
As any chemist knows, liquefying diamond, which is the hardest known natural material, a form of carbon, it requires extreme pressures and temperatures that were simply not achievable in a makeshift Bloomsbury lab.
And that detail highlights the nature of the gentleman scientist, doesn't it? He could fund the construction of these incredible, impossible materials, but his theoretical foundation was shaky. It was built on self-delusion and inherited arrogance.
And the machine's function escalated rapidly, mirroring the rising psychological tension in the house. First, it transmitted light, then sound. Next, it started transmitting unusual odors,
including that unmistakable smell of burnt rubber that Mary remembered so vividly from her childhood.
This is a crucial connection. That smell, which plagued Mary's nightmares, wasn't demonic at all. It was the byproduct of Horace's high-frequency experiments, a clear indication that the machine was affecting the environment, even if its primary function was flawed.
Finally, Horace realized the machine was transmitting matter molecules across the interface. And this led to his ultimate fatal ambition. He reasoned, if molecules can travel across the interface then, well, I'm made of molecules.
So by its 5th and largest incarnation, the machine was physically wide enough for a human being to step through. And Horace, desperate to fix his miserable marriage and his life, decided he must travel back to 1935, the year he married Mercy, to warn his younger self or his new bride.
This brings us to the disappearance in 1971. Mercy, utterly exhausted by the years of eccentric behavior, the loneliness, the constant disruption of her household, she finally snaps.
She storms the unlocked lab door, intending to condemn Horace publicly.
Horace, seeing his wife just collapse in exhaustion and despair, decides this is the moment. He tells Mercy, I'm sorry, Mercy, I'm just sorry. I'm going to make it all better, you'll see.
He turns back, enters a space between the 2 boxes, and there's a loud bang and a blinding flash of light. Mercy collapses, suffering a devastating stroke that leaves her permanently unable to walk or speak properly.
Now, we need to introduce George Mainwaring's version of the truth, which he kept hidden for 5 years. According to George, Horace did not successfully travel. He died instantly, likely from a massive heart attack, the moment the machine malfunctioned when Mercy barged in.
George, who was present, seized the moment. He quickly moved Horace's body, initially just under a table, and told the semi-conscious, traumatized Mercy that the machine had worked, that Horace had successfully traveled back to 1935 to make it all better.
The lie was brilliant, and it was effective. Mercy, physically incapacitated and mentally convinced by the flash and bang she'd witnessed, believed him implicitly. George successfully maintained this time travel illusion, securing 5 more years of his easy job and study time, until Mercy, recovering slightly, eventually forced him from the house soon after the incident.
But the tragedy of Horace's attempt is compounded by this chilling postscript that Mercy realized just before her stroke, a moment so shocking it likely contributed to her collapse.
Shortly after her marriage in 1935, Mercy remembered an incident. An old man, struggling violently with the butler, forced his way into the house, desperately screaming her name. "Mercy, I have to speak to you."
The man collapsed and died instantly of a heart attack right there in the hallway.
And Mercy realizes far too late that this dying man who knew her name was Horace himself. The future Horace, having successfully traveled back to 1935, only to die on arrival, completely failing in his mission to warn his younger self or her.
It is the ultimate irony. The machine did work, in a way, but only to confirm the utter failure of his life's work and to cause the psychological and physical collapse of his wife decades later. The tragedy of that looping destiny is just profound.
Right, so the scene shifts to early 1976 in Bloomsbury. The house is unstable, both financially and emotionally. Carol, resentful and angry about the move, is now heavily involved with Mandy, who has managed to procure LSD for a mere 50 pence.
Mary is at work, and the girls, fueled by drugs and curiosity, discover Mercy's journal and various notes scattered in the chaotic top room. They find the memoirs detailing Horace's supposed travel and Mary's instruction to stop him if he ever returned.
And they decide to experiment. Under the influence of LSD, they power up the machine and set the date to 1871 Hortense Ward's time.
The results are terrifying and highly significant. The LSD, combined with the machine's energetic feel, causes these intense hallucinations. Carol sees her mother, Mary, appear as a hideous, changing monster with huge eyes and snakes in her hair.
She says she feels physically submerged, like she's underwater. And Mandy also reports seeing Carol's face momentarily shift into moving snakes.
This is the critical, analytical moment the sources offer us. Carol's LSD episode, seeing snakes, experiencing paranoia and delirium, it mirrors Mary's own mysterious episode at age 16 almost exactly.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it suggests that the machine, even if it never worked as a functioning time transporter, was generating an energetic field.
Probably those ultra-high frequencies Horace used.
And that field was interacting with the psychological state of the inhabitants and the latent chemical triggers from the LSD.
Carol later provides confirmation of the house's historical pain. When they played with the machine, they heard the distinct sound of Hortense Ward screaming, followed by the sound of the housekeeper's cane striking her. A truly horrible, traumatic auditory manifestation of 1871 cruelty bleeding into 1976.
And Carol, despite her drug-addled state, she connects the dots. Her own bedroom was on the top floor opposite the lab, and she was the one who always complained about having nightmares.
The suffering of Hortense was the demoniac presence that Mercy always feared, and the machine was acting as an amplifier.
Mary returns home early after Liz, the maid, phones her, recognizing the girls are acting strangely. Mandy flees, and Mary tucks Carol, still recovering, onto the sofa. Mary then finally, armed with her mother's papers and the key, confronts the top room.
But she's not alone. Christopher, having been called by Carol, arrives, armed with a steel poker, ready to defend his estranged wife and daughter. They find George Mainwaring attempting to move the table that supports the time viewer.
And Christopher, whom George just derides as a second-rate mechanic, instantly establishes this protective perimeter.
George, sweating and surrounded by his usual body odor, tries to defend his continued presence in the house.
This leads to George's complete, shattering confession, confirming all of Mary's worst fears about her father's scientific claims. George dismisses Horace as a miserable bungler and a bloody amateur who was completely out of his mind.
He confirms what we suspected. The machine is a folly and never worked as a viable time machine.
He openly mocks the concept. He plugs the machine back in, sets the date to 1939, and theatrically walks between the boxes only to emerge unharmed, calling the entire enterprise a bloody, stupid pipe dream based on delusion and inherited money.
He then reveals the actual fate of Horace, confirming Mary's desperate need for closure. Horace died of a heart attack in 1971. George confesses he moved the body, initially hiding it under a table.
And then, burying him in the garden. He even specifies the location, 3 paces to the right of the cherry tree, next to the Georgian wall.
His stated reason for the burial and the lie was purely pragmatic. He wanted to maintain the time travel illusion, secure his easy, unsupervised job, and ensure uninterrupted access to his private studies.
But Mary asks the crucial question. Why else? Why go along with this elaborate folly for so long?
And here is where George's true, deep-seated motive just explodes out of a century of resentment. He answers with deliberate cruelty. Money, an easy job, no weekends, and I could get on with my own work. And there were other reasons, my daughter, for instance.
This is the moment. The paternity shock. The ultimate revelation of the Husher people's hidden bastard progeny.
George reveals he is the grandson of Hortense Ward, the 15-year-old scullery maid defiled by Louis Husher people. George is, therefore, Mary's distant relative, the result of a century of aristocratic exploitation.
And he reveals his meticulous, long-game revenge. He admits that he slept with Mary on New Year's Eve, 1960.
Mary, drunk and overwhelmed after her recent unsatisfying honeymoon and miserable about her return to the house, had completely blocked the memory of that night.
George confesses that the entire act was calculated. Mary, in her drunken state, had confided in him how much she hated the house and the trauma of her childhood, providing him with the final piece of motivation he needed.
And the confrontation culminates in George revealing that Carol is his daughter.
He is brutal in his delivery. He uses physical appearance to just crush Christopher's remaining hope. He taunts Christopher directly, saying, "Look at you both. You're both tall, blonde, slim, and good-looking. You think a child like Carol could come from a union between you two? I mean, you've only just to look at her."
And Carol, with her darker hair and different stature, was George's living, breathing act of vengeance. His entire mission was to achieve revenge and closure for the savagery done to his grandmother by the Husher peoples. He successfully defiled the current aristocratic line, ensuring his child Hortense's descendant carried the family inheritance. He achieved class victory through deception and infidelity.
Mary, pale and trembling, simply wants him gone. She gives George permission to take the machine, not because she believes in its function, but just to terminate the nightmare.
And Christopher, utterly defeated by the paternity revelation, is restrained by Mary from attacking George with the poker. George, having achieved his purpose, just leaves, declaring his business in the house is now complete.
The knowledge that Mary gained came at an almost unbearable price. The police arrived, Horace's body was exhumed, and the marriage was irrevocably shattered. The truth had just destroyed the stability of her entire life.
Mary and Christopher eventually sell both the Wanstead House and Bleak House in the early 1980s, and they separate amicably, because the source of their conflict, Carol, and the foundation of their relationship, the house, were both gone.
Christopher moves on with a new fiancée, Jenny, and Mary seeks total emotional escape.
She relocates to the Isle of Man, seeking what she explicitly calls a storm-free life, meaning free from emotional turmoil. She tries to find peace through simple hobbies like walking and amateur biology.
But the relentless nature of tragedy is not finished with her. In August 1980, Mary is woken from an afternoon nap by 2 police officers delivering the most devastating news.
Harold, only 20, is dead. Flight KXU 345 had crashed while taking off from Dulles International Airport, claiming all souls aboard.
And this loss is compounded by the knowledge Mary holds. She lives with the devastating reality that she has lost her daughter twice, once emotionally and psychologically when George revealed the paternity shock.
And again in the plane crash. The final binding tie between Mary and Christopher was severed, confirming their permanent separation.
Years later, we arrive at the final, astonishing piece of this puzzle. The truth behind Horace's folly. Mary is reading a newspaper article detailing a massive anonymous donation to the British Museum.
The donation consisted of 3 large triangular diamonds described as extremely rare that were uniquely impregnated with gold. The collective value was staggering, $4 million USD for each diamond, totaling $12 million.
Mary immediately recognizes them. These are the components from her father's time viewer, the crystallized material Horace had claimed to have created by liquefying diamond. The scientific folly contained immense accidental wealth.
And Mary realizes George Mainwaring's ultimate desperation wasn't philosophical or scientific at all. It was purely financial. He wanted the machine for the ridiculously valuable gold-impregnated diamonds, not the time travel, which he rightly dismissed as nonsense.
The irony is brutal. Horace, the gentleman scientist who believed he was conquering time, accidentally created materials worth millions. George, the second-rate mechanic and grandson of the defiled scullery maid, was the only one pragmatic enough to realize the machine's actual immense value.
What's fascinating, though, and speaks to the ambiguity of George's character, is the footnote on the donation. The museum benefactor requested that all fees charged to view the exhibit must go directly to a children's charity.
Which suggests that George Mainwaring, having achieved his revenge for his grandmother and secured his fortune through the sale of the remaining diamonds, or perhaps just one, donating the other three, maintained a final, complicated sense of conscience for the welfare of children.
Perhaps it was a tribute to his own mother, Peggy, or maybe a final remorseful gesture toward Carol. We can only speculate.
And Bleak House itself is now gone from the family. It was bought by a solicitor firm, stripped of its character, and is now simply a repository for legal documents. The Husher people legacy, built on inherited wealth and social cruelty, was dissolved by generations of secrets and the crushing weight of class conflict that George Mainwaring so ruthlessly exploited.
So we circle back to our core question for you, the learner. If George Mainwaring was correct, if Horace was merely a bungler, and the time viewer never fully worked as a time machine, how do we explain the decades of intense psychological trauma suffered by Hortense and later by Mary?
Right. We have to reconcile the physical manifestations, the nightmares, the screaming fits, the feeling of being observed, and that persistent, very specific burnt rubber smell, all connected to that top room. If the machine was a scientific failure, how do we account for its psychological influence?
The crucial takeaway, I think, is that the machine may have failed at time travel, but it may have been functioning just enough, perhaps through those ultra-high sound frequencies Horace pioneered, to allow the emotional, raw energies of the past.
Specifically, Hortense's horrific suffering in that cold, lofty room in 1871.
To bleed through and psychologically damage those who lived there decades later.
The house itself was the true repository of pain, holding the archive of cruelty, with Horace's time viewer inadvertently acting as an unwanted, powerful intergenerational amplifier.
And this raises an important question that you can continue to mull over. If the emotional energy of extreme trauma can persist and be amplified by something as simple as high-frequency sound waves, what invisible archives are we living alongside every day, and what unforeseen consequences might our own experiments, even the misguided follies, have on the future stability of our immediate environment?